There's a new season around the corner, which means some new cards. I'm going to go over all of the cards, spotlight catches that are with them, and tell you what is good, what's bad, what to play with those cards, what counters those cards, and everything all together. Stick around, watch it, subscribe. First up, we've got Gwenpool, the season pass card. It's coming out at the same time as Hydra Bob. So Gwenpool is a 4/6. Pick a random card in your hand 3 times. Give +2 power each time. So that's a bit like it's Nakia meets Ironheart. It's buffing your hand, but it's +2 to 3 cards like Ironheart. It can go multiple times on the same card. It's gonna be good in decks like Surfer, Deadpool, even like discard. So with Surfer, you got like Brood and Shaw, which are really good targets to get that plus power in your hand, and you can play out like a bigger Brood, you play out a bigger Shaw. With Deadpool, obviously you can hit Deadpool. It's a little bit late for Deadpool sometimes because it's like a 4/6, so I don't know if that would be the best use for the card. And then you have discard. You can like put it on a Dakin or Swarms and like be able to get extra value that way. I know discard's a little bit out of the meta right now, but could come back. But yeah, I think Surfer could really use that card. It's kind of interesting, but it is a 4-drop, which means that you're not getting one more 3-drop on your board in Surfer, but it does have some decent targets in there. There are maybe some other small things you could do, like maybe with Black Panther or something, but I don't think that's really worth it. You end up playing out all the cards that you buffed. This 4/6 turns into a 4/12, which is really overstated, so that could be good. And if you get on something like Brood, you're getting even more value on it. So it's pretty good. I think the card will actually be decent value. Decent card for a season pass card. Would recommend picking it up. I don't think it'll be super cracked and like a must have, but I think it'll be something that'll be fun and interesting to play with in some decks. It gets countered only by cards like Shadow King removing that buff, discarding your buffed cards in your hand. So if they play something like Silver Samurai, Moon Knight, or Black Bolt, they could end up discarding something that you played out, but it could be a way to like hold back some power early and then play out some bigger power late with the extra buffs. I don't know if it's something that you could like Wong and get some extra crazy power, because I don't know if you'd really want to do that. There might be some weird combo you could do that if you only have one card in your hand, just buff that a bunch and then play it out. But it does seem like it'll be a little bit difficult to target the exact cards that you want without emptying your hand in some way first. That's Gwenpool. The other card that comes out at the same time is Hydra Bob. Hydra Bob is a 1/4. After each turn, this moves if a player snapped. This is the first time that they've actually referenced the snap mechanic in a card. So maybe there's some more space for that mechanic to come out with some other cool stuff in the future. I'm kind of excited to see how that works out. Hydra Bob, it's a 1/4. There isn't any other card in Marvel Snap right now that is a 1/4. There's a couple 1/5s out there with some pretty big downsides. Hydra Bob's downsides doesn't seem quite as big as the other ones, like Martyr, where it'll like try and lose you the game if it can. This one, it will move, but maybe that's not so bad if you play cards like Craven. So it's kind of like a mini Silk that can move a little bit less controlled. But yeah, I think it's going to be best in like some move decks with Craven, but it is just like premium 1-drop stats. Premium as in it's not quite as good as like Ant-Man or Titania or even Martyr, but 1/4 is better than all those other like 1/3 and below cards. Like the standard stat is like 1/2. So it gets countered a little bit by decks that run like Kingpin or Craven, or just like you don't want the card to move. But you could do some snapping mind games, because maybe people will be like, oh, I need to snap them to make Hydra Bob move. And then they think that they're going to win because of that. But then now they're snapped in and they are stuck in the game. So it could be interesting. I'm not too sold on Hydra Bob being like cracked, but 1/4, like I said, a little bit premium, so might just be worth playing. Next up, I'm going to talk about the card that comes out at the end of the season, Cassandra Nova. I think Cassandra Nova is one of the more interesting cards, and it's kind of relevant right now with prevalence of Arishem. So Cassandra Nova is 3/1 on reveal. Steal 1 power from each card in your opponent's deck. So if your opponent's deck is huge, like an Arishem deck, it's going to steal a lot of power. If it's just a normal deck, on average, if you're playing it on turn 3, that means there's going to be 6 cards left in your opponent's deck, which means that it becomes a 3/7. Plus, it'll afflict 3 cards that your opponent draws, which means it's like 3 times worth of stats. So even against regular decks, it's going to be pretty good. But yeah, Arishem decks, it'll be a huge card. It'll still like have 3 cards that get afflicted if you play it out on curve on turn 3. It doesn't really have that many counters. Like obviously, if like your opponent's playing like Luke Cage or something, it'll remove the debuffs. But you could also have like Shadow King to make Cassandra Nova small again, or Cosmo to stop the on reveal. It's kind of like a Sage in that way, that it's just like, it's kind of a big card that you can kind of play out sometimes with some decent value. But yeah, I think Cassandra Nova is going to be really interesting, and I kind of am excited to see how it plays out with Arishem decks. Ajax is a 5/5 ongoing +1 power for each card in play afflicted with negative power. So as you can see with Cassandra Nova, that's why I talked about it a little bit early, is because it can work with Ajax stealing that power with the afflicted power. So when they play out those afflicted cards, Ajax is now gaining power. Ajax being a 5/5 feels a little bit low to me, honestly, on the power scale, just because it's kind of like a reverse Gilgamesh, where it's based on how many cards are afflicted with negative power as opposed to how many cards you have buffed on your side. And it's lower stats. It's a 5/5 to start instead of like a 5/9. So you're going to really need to afflict your opponent's cards. So you're going to need like High Evo with some Cyclops and some things. You maybe Toxic Sarah with some Hazmat, or like US Agent and Man Thing. I think it'll work with US Agent and Man Thing. I think that counts. We'll have to double check with that. But yeah, so like the max it can get is plus 12, right? Like unless you have like an onslaught in the lane. But since if you discount every single, or you afflict every single card on your opponent's side, it's going to be a 5/17, which is big, but very unlikely to get a 5/17. It's very unlikely that your entire opponent's board is going to be afflicted unless they have a full board and you play Hazmat on the last turn. It's probably not happening. So it's likely going to be probably like half of their cards, like 6 cards, which is a 5/11, which is not really that big. But if you end up getting that last turn Hazmat on a more full board, I do think that it could be a big enough card to be worth playing. And it is kind of interesting to play out with things like Cassandra Nova and like Toxic Sarah, High Evo stuff. But yeah, I'm not too sold on the card. I think Ajax is probably the one I'm looking forward to the least out of the season. Next up, Copycat, the last card we're going to talk about here. Copycat might be one of the more interesting cards. It has some unique things to it. It's a 3/5. When you draw this, steal the text from the bottom card of your opponent's deck. So that has 2 implications. It's a little bit like Iron Lad, but it's not from your own deck. That's your opponent's deck. So you could potentially get a really good effect from your opponent, because your opponent's probably going to want to be running good cards. But there are some really bad hits that you could get. Specifically, there's like Green Goblin, Red Skull, like those kind of things are just like pretty bad to put on your 3/5 card, and you're not going to want that. But it does give you information on what your opponent is not going to draw, because at the bottom of their deck, which is actually kind of good. So that means that you have that extra information. They have that extra information too, so they know they won't draw it. But with that, you can gain some information about what your opponent is playing. You can gain some information about what they won't have at the end of the game. So if you get like a Hela off of it, you're like, okay, it's a worthless card for me. It's still a good card to know that they don't have Hela in their deck anymore. But yeah, it's hard to tell what kind of value this card is going to give. I think Copycat's going to be one of the hardest ones to judge beforehand. It doesn't really slot into any real archetype right now. It's just kind of like a stats card that could just be good. I feel like it really is going to be dependent on what the meta is and how popular different cards are. Like if you're getting like a Darkhawk off of it, obviously that's going to be good. Or like an Iron Man, if like that's really popular, or a Sage, or even anything like that. Like if you get something that just like gives it some extra oomph, it might be good. It's not going to be that good in an Airship meta, I don't think, we're getting just like random cards. So Willow actually categorized every single Marvel Snap card into how good the Copycat card effects would be. So breaking them down into like Disaster being really bad, that they will actively discourage you from playing. Bad, which will actively hurt you in some situations, like Viper or Yellow Jacket. None being like something that doesn't really do anything, like Wasp, Thanos, M'Baku. And then okay, which is like similar-ish to None, but a little bit better, that it like has some buffing potential. Like if you have something like Sebastian Shaw, Craven, or Spectrum. Then there's like tech cards, which could be kind of compelling if it's like in the right place at the right time, kind of like Shang-Chi, Doc Ock, Cosmo, like those kind of things could be good, but not necessarily good. And then there's like straight up good cards like Nightcrawler, Nocturne, She-Hulk, Jubilee, all that kind of stuff. Things that like actually give you value. And then there's incredible cards like Iron Man, I said. I think something like Darkhawk would be really good. Things that just like give you really big. So I think those would be really good. And then Willow broke those down. There's 36 disasters, 9 bad, 19 none, 17 okay, which is kind of like to be expected. Most of them are okay. 21 tech, and 72 good, and only 15 incredible, according to what Willow categorized them as. Which means that if you had the random chance of like an Airstream deck, that was just like if you're getting a random card, there would only be a 5% chance that you get an incredible effect, 76% chance that it's at least okay. But these numbers do kind of flip around based on what the meta is and what you're facing a lot of, because if your opponents are playing decks that just have a lot of high value, not bad cards, you're gonna have a much higher chance of getting like an incredible or good card to pop out. But yeah, I think Copycat, it's gonna be hard to judge. I think it'll be fun to play. It might not be that good. It might be more like a Morph, where it's like sometimes you end up getting a really good card out of their hand. Morph's been actually showing up in the meta right now, so if that's the case, maybe Copycat has a place in this meta. We'll have to see. But I'm excited for these cards. I kind of wanted to go over as well the Spotlight caches. So for this month, this is one of the best months I've seen for Spotlight caches, I think, because there's a lot of good cards as the secondary cards in each cache. So the first cache is Hydra Bob, which comes with Nebula and Galactus in the caches. And I think Nebula and Galactus, both really good cards. Nebula, one of the best one drops for the longest time. You can play it out early and just force your opponent to kind of play into a lane to, like, you can do some clogging stuff, or you just get a lot of power from them not being able to play on that card. And Galactus, one of the more fun cards that have ever been in Marvel Snap. Honestly, a lot of people think it's a really toxic card, but I think it's just like fun to be able to Galactus your opponent sometimes. And there's actually a really good deck right now with Galactus, running this like really weird Ultron, Death, Killmonger, Galactus deck. I think that has been one of the more fun decks that I've played in the last couple of months, and Galactus goes into that. I think it'll be really fun. The next cache, Ajax's caches. This one has one of the best cards in the game right now that's kind of in every single deck because of Arishem, and that's Darkhawk. So if you can get Darkhawk, I think that's going to be super worth it to pick up this. Although I do, like I said, think Ajax is the worst card of the season, potentially the least interesting card at least. So it does get comboed with that. And then Beta Ray Bill is an okay card. It's pretty good in that Jane Foster deck, but it's kind of like not super great. Like, it's not something that you're like, I need this card, but it does open up the archetype to be able to play that Jane Foster deck, which is fun. And then next up, you have the Copycat, which gives you Coal Obsidian and Thanos, which both are great cards, especially together, because you play Coal Obsidian in a Thanos deck, but Coal goes into a bunch of other decks too. It's one of the more premium 4-drops you can get, being at 10 power, and Thanos just being like a whole archetype unto itself, I think is definitely worth picking up. So I think Copycat week is definitely a pickup week for me. Like, yeah, I want the Darkhawk from the week before, I want the Nebula Galactus, so it's going to be hard to, like, I think this is one of the best time to spend your Spotlight tokens, is just like this season. And then after that, you have Hope Summers and Proxima Midnight on July 30th to August 6th. I think those cards, I think they're coming out with Cassandra potentially. That will be also really good. Proxima, really good in discard decks. Hope, one of the better cards in the game, I think, just like really good at securing you that extra energy for those extra turns. Like, it's just like a better Fastos. So it just like gives you a lot more flexibility in what you play out on the future turns. And you can also play it out with that Kitty Pride and get a lot of extra energy every turn. I'm a big fan of these cards. I think this will also be another good cache to pick up. We'll see what happens this season, but stick around for some gameplay from this season in the upcoming videos. Watch for them this week. I will be playing with both Hydra Bob and the season pass card Gwenpool this Tuesday, so come by my stream for that and watch the videos here on YouTube. But yeah, subscribe if you're not subscribed already. See ya!